Hello there, I'm Lauren with Bold Notion Quilting, and I wanted to take a moment and give you all some tips on how to end up with a straighter quilt when you're finished. So first things first, I really want to show you how to square off your quilt when you're done free motion quilting it, but I wanted to show you how you could maybe get some straighter blocks to begin with. So I was making up this quilt for a client, and she wanted this block and this block together. Well, I had to figure out some creative ways to do the math on this block because I wasn't going to piece everything separately. I wanted to do strip sets and 9 patches and the whole thing. So I needed to get this block to be the same size as this block, and I knew I was going to cut it down. So the main thing I needed to do was be able to have a 1/4 of an inch between the green square and the tip for my seams for when I sew. And then I knew I was going to have to cut this down. So in order to make that process go more smoothly, I went to Lowe's and I asked them if they could cut me a 10.5 by 10.5 inch plexiglass template. And sometimes they just do it out of scraps. This cost me $1, and it is exactly 10.5 by 10.5. It's the same size as this block. And I just put it over the top, and I use my guidelines. So let's see, I hope you can see my guidelines. Sometimes the glare can really get in the way. So I've got a 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I mark that all the way around. And I just take my quilting ruler and I lay it on top, and I mark my 1/4 of an inch. Then I do 1 inch around and 2 inches around, and then I do crosshairs going through. I don't know if you can see that. So that I have a center of my block, and then I have some guidelines to kind of gauge what the center would be, so it can be really great for fussy cutting. I then lay my block on top, and I kind of line it up so that I can get that green tip to a 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, try to make sure it's as straight as possible. Then I'll take my cutter and I'll cut all the way around it. And that will give me a nice square block when I'm finished to sew up with this one to give me my quilt top. So that will really help in that regard. And then when you fast forward, you've pieced all your top together, you free motion quilted it, now you need to do what's called squaring off your quilt top. When I square off my quilt top, I use my big old cutting table. This thing is super heavy, it's 2 layers of batting. And I line up my ruler with my quilt top. Okay, so what you want to do is I like to take the biggest ruler I have because then I have to make less cuts, and you line up a portion of the side at 2 points so you get a nice straight line. I usually do it from the bottom and the top of my ruler, and I line them up with the edge of my quilt. Now when you have your quilt on here, the most important thing I can tell you is try to have your quilt look like it's straight on your table. If for some reason it's pulling and it's curved, you're not going to get accurate cutting. So if you see, if I pull this and curve it and I try to make it straight, you're not going to get as accurate of cutting. So you want to make sure that there's no tension on your quilt top. Make sure there's no portion of your quilt top underneath your quilt. Smooth it out. Get it as straight as possible. Line up your 2 edges with the edge of your quilt. Okay, so we're going to line it up with the bottom corner, line it up with the top corner of my ruler against the edge of my quilt. Then I'm going to go ahead and cut and pull away. Now you'll notice I've got some areas that my quilt is a little bit pulled in from my quilting, and some areas that go all the way to the edge. As long as you don't have more than a 1/4 of an inch, or 1/8 of an inch, I'm sorry, right in here, you know that that binding is going to cover the 1/4 of an inch. Most of my binding is 1/2 of an inch, so I don't have to worry about that as much. But as long as you have at least 1/8 of an inch, and or you've stitched down the edge of your quilt, you don't have to worry about that coming out of your binding. So then what I would do is just advance and go all the way around. This thing is super heavy, so you want to whip it around. Make sure there are no portions of your quilt underneath. That is the biggest thing, okay? Because ask me how I know, right? I've cut into portions of like this excess before. Thank God it was not my quilt, but definitely opened my eyes to what a catastrophe that could be. And once this feels nice and straight, and cut it again. Now if you've got a smaller working area and you're not sure that you'd be able to do a big project on it, just grab a smaller ruler and do little bits at a time until you're finished. But I would go all the way around. The other thing that you can do this way is if for some reason you needed it to come out a little more because let's say your design's going to get covered with your binding, you can always line up your ruler so that the 1/4 of an inch mark lines up with your edge, and then if your binding is 1/2 inch like mine usually is, if you do the double fold bias, then it will cover that extra and you'll have a 1/4 of an inch between your block and your seam. So thank you so much for watching this tutorial today. I hope it's helpful. I didn't realize so many people weren't sure how to square off their quilt tops. I just had seen it on a Facebook group post, and I wanted to make a little how-to video for my Free Motion Monday. So please join us on Mondays as we drop videos, tips, tricks, and how-tos, just to kind of help everyone get all the same information. I've taken a lot of information from various different places, and I love being able to share it with you. So feel free to like the page, share the post, share the page, join up so that we can share all this information. So thank you so much. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing some of your completed projects on the page. Happy quilting!